I want to look at how your menstrual cycle affects your menopause and how the phases of the menstrual cycle are gifts that we can use in our post-menopause. I'd like you to ponder on your menstrual cycle, wherever you're at in your life. Think back to your first bleed. How was it received? How did you feel? And then think about how your menstrual cycle changed during your life. The first few years, the menstrual cycle is getting established. And so your periods may be irregular. As you put on weight or as you lose weight as you go through life, that can affect your menstrual cycle. If you're in a stressful situation, that can affect your menstrual cycle. So it's not a fixed thing. That's the first thing that I want you to see, that it's actually, some people call it the sixth vital sign. It reflects what's going on in our life. But the first years, it takes time to establish the cycle. So it tends to be irregular. It's settling, like our hormones in the hormonal chart. You'd have a quick look at this hormonal chart through our life. In the beginning of the menstrual cycle in adolescence, the hormones are really quite up and down, and that may have an effect on how the hormonal changes in the other direction as we go into the menopause. So that's why I invite you first to think of those early years. And I think sometimes some of the issues, I know many women believe that many of the issues they have, either with fertility or even with the menopause, may be caused by taking synthetic hormones in puberty and not allowing the body time to adapt to this new rhythm. So interfering a bit too quickly could be a reason. So you might want to ponder how contraception may have impacted your menstrual cycle through your life, and how different types of contraception may have impacted your whole being, in fact, may have impacted your moods, your sense of who you are. Ponder that. Also, if you had children. And again, today, we are exposed to many more influences in terms of our environment, in terms of chemicals in our environment, in terms also of synthetic hormones than our ancestors. There are also many other things in the environment, not just hormones, but I'm just focusing a bit on hormones today because they do have an effect on our menstrual cycle. And today some women are not only having hormones for contraception, but similar kind of hormones to conceive. And so that is changing the natural rhythms of our body. And so if you've had fertility treatments, then maybe ponder about how they affected your being and your fertility. And then as you age, how your menstrual cycle was affected, how it's changing in the perimenopause if that's where you are. But other important areas when it changes are if you have children. So in pregnancy, you don't have the menstrual cycle, you're in a different phase of your life. And if you breastfeed depending on how often and how long you breastfeed for, you're also suppressing your menstrual cycle. And today I want to look at how the menstrual cycle itself provides a template of rhythmic changes in our body. And I know that some people like to talk about the menstrual cycle as a journey through the seasons. I also have a way of looking at the menstrual cycle as a journey through the seasons, but for me, the journey through the seasons is a longer journey, and it's the seasons through our life, and I have a separate video on that. And I don't see the menstrual cycle quite so simply as winter to spring to summer to autumn. So I want to today look at the different phases of what I see in the menstrual cycle. And these are words that I've created myself, understanding what are the qualities of the menstrual cycle. So I've created a diagram that shows you these different qualities. I suppose the kind of issue I have with the seasons is the menstrual cycle, if we're looking at an average 28-day cycle, which of course is only an average. So most women don't have a 28-day cycle, and that cycle does change through our life. It takes, some people say it takes till we're about 21 or so to really establish our regular cycle, but our regular cycle may not be 28 days. Our regular cycle might be 30 days, or it's better if it's longer, because if it's a shorter cycle, then we don't have enough time necessarily to mature an egg. So I'll get onto that in a moment. But pondering, if we're taking the average, which is 28 days, and that's a month, that's a lunar month. So I do like to link the menstrual cycle to the rhythms of the moon. But the moon has the same rhythms, whatever season of year we're in. Okay, the moon might be in a different place of the sky, but it's still on a 28-day cycle. So I like to consider the lunar cycle, but we can't really conveniently divide the menstrual cycle into 4 equal lengths. So my way of looking at it is that we have, and so I've actually changed it, because in most charts you see day 1. Well, I mean, I've kept day 1. Day 1 is the bleeding, because that's the thing that's tangible, that's the thing we see. We don't need to have tests for knowing when day 1 is. But that's in the middle of this phase on the chart that's in green, which is what I call the liberating and transforming phase of the menstrual cycle. Because our bodies are complex and we have lots of different rhythms going on, and we can't simplify it all to spring, summer, autumn, winter, or even yin and yang, and we're all unique. But that's the essence of this phase of the menstrual cycle that for me feels that it makes sense. And to begin that phase when the changes that initiate menstruation begin. So that's a few days before. And I'm also aware that many people don't fully understand the menstrual cycle and the role of the corpus luteum. The corpus luteum is the yellow thing in the picture that starts to grow, and actually it's shown in my picture because it's the follicle that released the egg. So this is of course a natural menstrual cycle that's not controlled by hormones, because if it's controlled by hormones, we don't, many hormones suppress ovulation, so it's different. But in a natural menstrual cycle, we see on day 1 we've got little brown things, and there are several follicles in a natural cycle. Follicle, the fluid-filled sac within the ovary that contains the eggs, and several of them, about 5, start to mature their egg to a final phase of maturation for ovulation, but only 1, occasionally 2, are matured at ovulation. And so that's why it's kind of brown and it's blood. And then at ovulation, the egg that was released, the follicle that released its egg that came to maturation, becomes yellow. And that's why it's called the corpus luteum. It becomes the yellow body, and this yellow body stays within the ovary, and it's now regulating hormonal changes. But it's growing, as you can see. It's growing in what I call the nourishing phase of the cycle. I'll get more into the phases, but I want to explain the corpus luteum, because it's then why does it stop growing? It only stops growing after about a week to 10 days after ovulation, if there's no fertilized egg that implants in the womb. So that's also important. The fertilized egg has to actually implant for the corpus luteum to carry on, as then it sends signals back to the ovaries. Corpus luteum carry on and support pregnancy. So the egg could be fertilized, but doesn't arrive and implant in the womb. In fact, many fertilized eggs don't. That's their kind of first test. Can they make it into the womb from the ovaries, from the fallopian tube, sorry. That's where they tend to get fertilized. Can it make it down the fallopian tube into the womb and implant? And if it doesn't, then the corpus luteum disintegrates. And it's that brings the hormonal changes that initiate menstruation. So I like to see that whole phase. It's like, okay, no corpus luteum. So now we need to start to get ready to clear out the womb. So like with anything in life, when you first see the blood, it doesn't just come out of nowhere. You've had a few days of preparing to bleed. And that's, for me, the same energy as then bleeding. It's a continuation of that bit of the cycle, which I call liberating and transforming. So we first need to clear out our womb. And then, well, in order to clear out the womb, there are hormonal changes, but also emotional, and that's often, PMT, premenstrual syndrome. It's preparing. And in Chinese medicine, that's liver energy moving. That's actually a yang energy, and that does relate to a season. In fact, that's the movement of spring. And often people talk about the menstrual phase as more being winter, but actually it's quite active. Just before we have our first blood, the body's been getting ready to release. And actually the menstrual cycle itself, I've said it's a measure of where we're at in our life, but it's also helps prepare for future phases of life. And that's why it's interesting in terms of the menopause, because what was our capacity to release? How did we release? How did we, in the few days before bleeding, how did we feel? It shows the spring energy. The spring energy is this shoot coming out of the earth, a yang movement. In Chinese medicine, the yang energies increase. You can see that actually in the diagram. The yang energies gradually increase to prepare for the blood. Liver energy rises, extraordinary vessels are involved in this. And then also at the same time, the lining of the womb, the blood vessels start to constrict. And so that's, how did we experience that first bit when our body's getting ready to release, which is also a learning for or a preparing for giving birth. It's very similar energies. How do we release during birth or birthing anything? You could even say this is a liberation. It's a birthing. It's a birthing. It's a releasing. It's a birthing. How do we clear? How do we experience this bit of the spring in a way, this moving out? Can we let go of the end of that cycle of the womb lining building? Can we let go of energetically how we're feeling? Can we release? How do we release? How do we let go of things? Releasing. How do we release? And then it builds into the release. And in that release, as we let go, things change. We let go of that cycle, but it's fairly complex as well, because as you can see, we're letting go, we're transforming, we're letting go, but also new eggs are maturing. So our body's not just doing one thing. It never is just doing one thing. Even the cycle of spring, summer, autumn, winter, it changes during the day. But it's now releasing and letting go. And in that letting go, things start to transform. And we're also transforming the eggs that are now getting ready for the next cycle. So lots of things are going on. You can't say it's just a winter, because things are growing inside. The follicles are maturing. So how did you relate to that phase? And as I say, it prepares for birth, but it also prepares for the menopause. How does that influence your menopause? Because in the menopause, when you no longer have the release through menstruation, it's very easy to hold on to things unless we're more conscious about releasing. It's like we have to decide to release. And while we're getting used to this change, I find also as we know with the menstrual cycle of releasing, It can bring up feelings of anger or frustration as we're preparing to release, resistance. It can be tiredness. We're all different, but that's why I want to reflect on how you are, or how you were during that time. And now in the menopause, if you're in the menopause, how are you able to let go of things? What is that? Even when we're in the autumn or in the winter or the second spring, whatever season we're in, the other seasons do still have their echoes with us. So how, wherever we are in our life season, how are we able to connect with this movement of the spring, of the shoots pushing through the earth, of letting go, of releasing, so that we can transform? We need to let go and release till the end of our lives. And the reset of the menopause is also preparing. The final biggest release is when we die and we let go of our body. So how does this phase affect us in the menopause? We don't have the physical support of our body releasing each month the menstrual blood, but we can more consciously, so we have to more consciously choose to release, but also to keep this wood energy, this yang energy flowing, not to see it as a decline and a rest per se. We might be slowing down in some ways physically, but we still need to keep active. We still need to be able to release. We still need to have this wood spring energy within us until we die. Even if we're not running around in the same kind of way as when we were a teenager, if we make it into our 90s, but we still need to know how to release. So this is the thing I say, one of my affirmations for the menopause is, I accept that my energies, my physical energies are waning, but my capacity to direct them increases. So we need to be more consciously aware of how we can release, how we can keep this energy of releasing and liberating so that we can transform. So that's what I call the menstrual phase of the cycle. I mean, that's, for me, it doesn't just begin with the first blood. And then we can see, I'm sure you all know this, that again, gradually only one egg is maturing for ovulation. The other ones die away. And then so your energy now needs to build. The lining of the womb keeps building. But also, before our energy builds, we've released a lot. So also, the menstrual cycle prepares us potentially for having a baby. We release, we birth, or we could be birthing projects or whatever we need to let go of in our life. But then after that, we've opened up. And that's why in many traditional societies, women, when they're actually in the bleeding phase, spend time together, because their energies are very open, and often women have visions then, they have a better view of their life, they've let go of their day-to-day attachments, and it's quite nice to be in a different space so that you can just reflect and connect with the bigger picture in a way. But you can't rest, you can't stay in that space. You need to, so this is the next phase, gather back in. And then you can renew your energies, regenerate, renew, because you've let go of all this blood, you've let go of energies. All your energies are quite low. The lining of the womb is low, you've lost blood. So it's the time when you are going to be the most tired. So that's the winter aspect and the needing for rest. But you first have got to gather back in. So that's why rest, maybe not going out too much if you can. Obviously, depending on your work, you might not be able to take this time, but recognizing this capacity to gather back in. And after giving birth to a baby, we have released the most that we're ever going to release in our life physically. So it's even more important to gather back in after having a baby. And in most traditional societies, women would be resting for at least a month. But even in most of the first year, rest and gathering in would be the priority, and rebuilding the energies. That was considered really important. And in traditional Chinese medicine, they would say, if you don't rebuild your energies enough after having a baby, this can then affect you in the rest of your life. That's quite important. So what is your capacity for gathering back into yourself? Do you take time to withdraw from the outer world and be on your own and reflect and gather back in? And do you take time to rebuild your energies? And how did you do that in your menstrual cycle? Because that's the preparing. Because what we do in the menopause is we're not bound to this earthly sense of the menstrual cycle, a 28-day cycle. We can choose where we are in our life and what's going on in our life, which phase of the cycle we want to connect with in any given time. Our body is freer, we're freer, our spirit is freer. So we can decide, this is where I am. I'm in more, I need to gather in. I need to renew my energies. I need to take time for me and build back up again so that I can then manifest. It's hard to have a word for the ovulation that isn't released, because it is also a release, but it's the egg. So going back to the menstrual cycle, the egg released at ovulation, it's an internal release. We've matured the egg. So if you see the egg as you, I like to use the image in the menopause actually of our energies have redirected so that we become the baby, or we become the egg, or we become the project, and we mature. And then we might want to release something, a creative project, to manifest something. We've nourished this egg to this phase where it's ready to be nourished by another energy. In the menstrual cycle, that other energy would be the sperm, so that it can continue to grow, because if it's not nourished by an energy from outside, it's going to die within 24, 32 hours. But in our freedom from the cycle, we have a project, we release it into the world, or maybe it's a new version of ourselves. We change, we transform, and then we've built up our energies, and then we manifest something new. And so we ask for support from the outer world to help it carry on its journey. In the menstrual cycle, after that manifesting, which often people do talk about, if they talk about seasons, this is the spring, because you're releasing. And it is a yang movement, it is an out, but it's an inner yang movement. So that's why I like to say manifesting. So how good are we at nourishing our manifestations and then letting them out to meet new energies? And then the next phase, but we need to continue to nourish them. We can't just let them go out. If it's a book or a house or a project, they need to still keep being looked after. If it's a baby within the menstrual cycle, the lining of the womb still needs to keep building up to receive this fertilized egg, if the egg is fertilized, and have a nice, juicy, rich place for it to implant. And so that's why I can't really relate to this as summer so much, or autumn, because autumn is a gathering in, a letting go, whereas this actually is a building up phase. We're still building the line of the womb. We have the corpus luteum, which is growing, which is nourishing. And that's why I say it's a nourishing. We're preparing the ground, the fertile soil, for an egg to implant. And this nourishing phase will carry on if the egg is fertilized and implants for the rest of pregnancy. The corpus luteum actually continues for 10 weeks in pregnancy while the placenta develops. But it's still quite energy building. We need to nourish ourselves a lot in this phase. So how do we continue to nourish ourselves after we have created something? And I suppose another question in the menopause is, if we see the changes in the menopause as redirecting our energies so that we can nourish ourselves for the second phase of our life, how do we nourish ourselves in the second phase of our life? If we want to live a long and healthy life, we need to be nourished. We need to keep looking after ourselves. We can't just let go. We need better nourishment, well, maybe better, but we need to keep on nourishing ourselves. We need to be the mother to our inner child. So I hope you can relate to these. I'd be interested to know what you think about my four phases, their unequal lengths, the words that I've chosen for them, and how you relate to it. So yeah, I think if we can see the menstrual cycle as another rhythm and flow within our life, like we have the seasons, like within the outer world, we have day and night, we have the seasons, we have the annual seasons, we have more long cyclical seasons. But as women, we also have the cycle of menstruation, and we can still, even in the menopause, access the gifts of these different phases of our menstrual cycle, because we've actually spent a long time of our life, well, depending on whether we had contraception, whether we took contraception, how many children we have, how many times we've been pregnant, our menstrual history, but a large part of our life has been spent within this cycle. But after the menopause, we're no longer bound to this cycle, but we can choose to embrace the gifts of each of these different phases of the cycle in our own unique rhythms. And that's, for me, the nature of the second seasons of our life. We don't have this, we're not so tied to our body. Yes, we need to accept that we're growing older and we need to take care of ourselves, but we're not so tied, especially women, to this monthly cycle. But we've learned a lot from it. It's prepared us for giving birth if we have had children. It's prepared us for other phases of our life. But then we can draw upon the knowledge, hopefully, of connecting to each of these different phases, the knowledge of how we can release and how we can transform, the knowledge of how we gather in and how we can nourish ourselves, the knowledge of how we can manifest, and then the knowledge of how we deeply continue to nourish ourselves to support us in the second half of our life, when we no longer have this cycle, but we've been prepared, and now we have to find our own unique way of being. And that, in a way, is the wisdom of aging. So I hope you've enjoyed this video of exploring the gifts of the different phases of the menstrual cycle and how you can use them even after you're no longer bleeding. And I'd love to hear what you think, and if you have any questions, please do ask.